What is up, everybody? Clone here. And I guess I'm gonna do PRs. It's been a minute, but I'm gonna go through every single team and just give my thoughts, basically. Maybe I'll give a record predicted and if I think that they can make playoffs with the team. But yeah, so sorry if I live in the ghetto, unfortunately. Not the ghetto, but you can't afford quiet housing unless you pay like $1 million over here, so probably be background noise. But yeah, so first team first is Logan's team. Overall, I kind of looked at this team earlier, kind of for my thoughts, and I thought overall it's pretty good. I don't think there's a single bad mod on this team. Even the Corsola at least there's some use to it, you know. Even though it's not the greatest Pokemon, I mean, at 3 points is pretty good value for it, I would say. And then I like his speed tiers are pretty solid, even though they're not that great. They're good enough, you know. You kind of want something faster than Mega Lade, but it's not that bad. He has good enough breakers, both physically and specially. Even though Galvantula and Fini are the only special breakers, I thought, you know, overall as a team, it's pretty good. I really like his Dragon Fairy Steel Core. Like Fini, Mel, and Mence sound really good together. They just sound really good together, and I think on paper they're a really solid core when it comes to breaking, and defensively as well. They're pretty solid because, you know, Mel's struggles would be most obviously fighting, fire, and ground, which is covered pretty nicely by Fini and Mence. I like Lade plus Incineroar as well. I think that's a pretty solid duo he has. Incineroar is probably one of the better dark types in draft as far as dealing with the bulky psychics go. And then Incineroar also is much better this gen with Boots as well. Even though Ipapa is not as good, Boots kind of help it a lot. And then something interesting too is Incineroar's Parting Shot is very useful for this kind of build where I'd say he has he has 3 Pokemon that are really reliant on setup. And Parting Shot can kind of just give you free setup and free breaking opportunities that normally, you know, Mega Lade might struggle to break through teams if like I'm playing super offensively. But if your Psychic type gets Parting Shotted or like your Ghost type gets Parting Shotted, then you're not gonna be able to do enough damage to Mega Lade, right? And then he's gonna get that free SD and maybe sweep you. So I like that aspect. The hazard removal is pretty good. I wish he had a grounded poison, but I guess having Fini is not that bad, but you never want Fini to come in on T-Spike, right? So I wish he had a grounded poison. He has most of like the core like synergies that you need within like you know, Farwater Grass and everything. I'm not a huge fan of Serena, but it's not that bad overall as like a Pokemon. I wish. Oh yeah, something else. So I guess something interesting is whenever you take a steal without, whenever you take a steal without rocks, like Metal, for example, or what's the good Kartana, you kind of want a Psychic or like a Ghost to learn rocks, and he did do that with Corsola, but Corsola is not the greatest rocker, right? So you probably want at least one more rocker. That's pretty solid, but at the same time, Rhyperior is not that bad, and rocks aren't as important as they used to be, but considering you have Mega Gallade who loves to just click knockoff, right, you kind of want to abuse the fact that you can spam rocks, right, and actually get value out of them. And something I guess Gallade clicking knock for Metal is really nice as well, he doesn't really like, what's it called, Rocky Helmet, right? So I think it's a really good team. There's a lot of synergies. All the Pokemon are pretty good. Like, you kind of understand what each Pokemon is going to do in his team and how they work together. So I think that's why it's pretty good. So it's a good mix between like breakers and Metal and setups, which is like Mence, you know. There's like a good balance. And then his role players are all really good as well. I don't dislike any of these guys. Anything I'm missing? I don't know if I mentioned, but I do like his hazard removal as well. He has really good hazard removal, one of the better ones. But I wish he had like T-spikes, something more than just webs, you know, right? That to actually support it, because webs are a little bit unreliable. But overall, I think it's one of the better teams. I like it, and Logan isn't obviously one of the better coaches, but I imagine he can't do that bad with this team, or you know, he doesn't win a single game, right? I feel like he can win games with this team. Like it's just good enough, you know, that he can actually win games, right? But yeah, overall, I like the team. Swick's team. So I mean, you have Urshifu, right? It's a really weird build, I will say that. It's the most immediate thing that I noticed is that the speed tiers are really whack, right? He has not a single mon that's faster than base 100, right? His only mon that's faster than base 100 is Regieleki, and Regieleki doesn't even count because it's too fast, right? It's like 200 speed, so you're never gonna force prep with Regieleki, which is kind of a problem, I think. And especially, I think it's especially important with Urshifu, right? Urshifu is a really strong Pokemon, but his biggest problem is that he's only like 97 speed. So you kind of want to be able to have a lot of speed control options and prevent people from just revenging you and forcing you out, which is something that this Urshifu is going to struggle with. So even though he has the breaking damage and even has a Goth, right, to support the Urshifu in getting rid of Psychics and getting rid of items and all that other stuff, I can imagine certain things like a good example would be something I've used in the past, like Poison Point Nidoking, Poison Point Nidoqueen, to counter Urshifu with a helmet, and you're playing odds and you're getting a lot of chip damage on it, and then it's in range, right? But that's not going to be so easy with a Goth, right? So you're preventing a lot of items that can counter Urshifu, but you're not really preventing the other aspect of countering Urshifu, which is just outspeeding it and revenging it, which could be an issue, you know. So either his Urshifu is forced to run Scarf, which then it loses a lot of damage, and you can't predict this easily, and then or you're running Band when you're gonna get outsped, right? But I think defensively the thing that I'm not completely sold on it is defensively these kind of mons make sense together, like Pex, Moltres, Sylveon, that makes sense together to me, defensively. And then with Steelix Mega as a ground, it's a really good ground. So I kind of like all these defensive checks, but I don't like the synergy it has with the offensive threats. Being Shifu and Dharma, I don't think that they make sense necessarily with the defensive mons that he picked, because you really want to just get like a bunch of momentum and a bunch of like U-turning and pressure on, right? But even though Moltres does get U-turn, right, they're all the Pex, Sylveon, and even Steelix are really passive. And then another thing too, I will say at least he drafted Pex, Ground Poison, and T-Spike. I like that. I think he has good rockers. Mega Steelix is a really reliable rocker. Torterra is a really good rocker. But I'm not sold on. The main thing is, I think the most important thing about any team would be the synergy between your picks, right? I don't buy the synergy between his picks. Even though he has Urshifu and Dharm, which are, you know, really strong breakers, they don't mesh well with the rest of the team. But he does have good win cons. He does have good breaking. Obviously, like Goth and stuff, and Shedinja can force a lot of prep and Ditto. But yeah, I'm just not buying the synergy between all the picks. And usually I like 6 drafts, so it's a little bit weird to me. So overall, I would say it's kind of a weird draft. I'd say not weird in a good way either. I feel like the Pokemon, they don't just mesh well with each other. And it's weird because I kind of like every single Pokemon in his team. I like, it's kind of like Logan's team, where I like every single Pokemon that Logan has. I like every Pokemon that Swick has, right? But I don't like them together, which is I think the difference, right? And you can kind of tell, like, how does Moltres help Urshifu necessarily, right? It doesn't really. How does Sylveon help Urshifu? It doesn't really. How does Pex help Urshifu? It doesn't really, right? Aside from being like a fighting resist. Like, they don't really help Urshifu do better, or a fairy resist. They don't really help Urshifu excel, right? And so I think this is a good example of, like, even though I do think Urshifu is one of probably the best Pokemon in this format right now, currently, it's a good example of why he can struggle is because you don't support him well enough. Even though it is really easy to support him, right? You just draft a bunch of momentum, a bunch of speed, and you go crazy, right? Getting him in for free a lot and stuff like that. But I think you're gonna rely too much on Goth to make this team work, and that's gonna create problems basically. Or if you don't bring Goth at all, and then you kind of just struggle to get Urshifu in, right? So Urshifu, you're gonna see a lot of games where maybe Swick gets Urshifu in like maybe 4 times, 5 times, and he just loses, right? Because it's not enough for Wicked Blow to actually start putting in work. But yeah, overall, I'm not a big fan. Brian's draft, so speed tiers wise, it's really good. Polt, Lottie, that covers pretty much everything. Polt being outsped by a couple of things, but even though Polt is outsped by, like, you know, like Zera and stuff, it's not that bad because at least you're still forcing the Zera to run speed, right? The Lottie is good. It's a really solid speed tier. I think when I looked at this draft earlier, I was like, I'm buying it, and then even with the Stunfisk, I'm still buying it. I like the draft, but I'm not a big fan of, like, how he finished it. Mainly Amoonguss seems a little bit weird because I feel like he's really pricey. 10 points is not cheap. Even if you wanted to ground poison, right? I'm not gonna say draft Gloom, even though you should have drafted Gloom. There's so many good ground poisons, like Roselia even is a good ground poison. I know, Roselia should be free in this pool. And it actually gives you like T-Spikes, which are really nice with Polt and Lottie and all those other guys, right? To kind of wear down fairies. But I kind of like the Dragon Spam, where they're gonna just put a lot of pressure on Steel types, right? And then maybe Clefable can win based off of that. And then you have a Heatran as well to kind of break down fairies and Steel. So offensively, this team makes a lot of sense. These top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though there's 3 dragons, it makes a lot of sense offensively. But the biggest thing with with drafts, that if you're gonna go for like a really strong offensive core, you need to make sure that your defensive picks or your role players are like solid, right? And I do think he has good rockers. I think Stunfisk, Heatran, and Clef are really good rockers. I think his hazard removal is pretty solid. Actually, is it? He only has D-Knight, right? D-Knight and Latios? Am I tripping? Yeah, he only has... Wait, okay, maybe his hazard removal is not that solid. But you're running boots on most of these mons anyways, or on Clef, so it doesn't really matter, but your hazard removal could be better. You don't have T-Spikes, which is kind of a problem. Scrafty is not really a mon that helps this draft. Mainly because it gives you... It's just another mon that loses the fairies, right? And then also, as a dark type, it doesn't fulfill the role of like stopping like bulky psychics from like CMing you. Like, it doesn't really solve that issue necessarily because it's 4 times weak Dazzling Gleam, and that's a big problem, right? So like you could run like if you get rid of Tran, then psychics could just run Dazzling Gleam, right, and sweep you. And I don't like Amoonguss on this team at all. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Aside from the fact that it might spore something, and that might be good, but I mean, Sleep Powder is basically spore, right? If you're a man. And then Chinchino and Palpitoad, I think Palpitoad is a Pokemon, but it's not good as your water type. I think as your only water type, you're gonna create issues, right? And especially in a draft that has ice weakness, you're gonna rely on Heatran a lot, I think, and that's gonna create problems where, since Heatran is your defensive check and it is 4 times a week to ground, it can get surprised and prep pretty easily, right? By just random fighting coverage, random ground coverage, even random water coverage on certain mons. So the Heatran can get surprised very often, so you're gonna rely on it defensively. Even though Heatran is very good and it's a very solid pillar of a draft, it's going to be overworked, I think. And then you kind of never want to bring any of these bottom 4 mons, so that's also an issue. So I don't like the Palpitoad being your only water is my biggest qualm, but overall I think it's kind of one of those drafts where it's defined by the player, where if you just play very, very offensively and you get the doubles right, you get the predictions right, you're going to be able to win any game, right? But against coaches that are better than you or may have prepped better than you, you might struggle way more than you normally would have if your draft was more solid, right? But it's one of those drafts where if you just play very well offensively, you can win any game, right? So I don't dislike the draft overall because I really liked his core and it's pretty unique. But I wish his bottom 4 mons were a little bit better because he has the points to make it work. Like 17, 20, 24 points. 24 points for 4 mons is very good amount of points, right? You could have solidly filled this out and just covered all your weaknesses, right? And then this draft would have been one of the most unique and best drafts, right? But that's the only issue I see with this draft. I do think Brian is a good enough coach to make playoffs with this draft, so I could see him doing really well. I think it's more about it's not really a question about whether or not Brian is good enough, but it's whether or not Brian is going to put in the effort to make this draft work, right? But yeah, overall, I like the draft. It's not as good as Logan's, but it's still pretty solid and it's unique. So is yours. What's my original thoughts about this team? I mean, he does have good speed tiers, I think. Yeah, he does. He has solid cores, or he has a lot of momentum, right? And this is a good amount of momentum for him, whereas like Lando, Rotom, Mienshao, right? And then you have Milotic and Dragalge flip turning. He has that kind of like stable fairy type, so this is kind of like a standard draft by him, but it's also a little bit weird because he's filling out roles weirdly, I'd say. I don't like the fact that your only rocker really is Mega Aggron and Grotto. It could create some issues. I'm not sure what Rotom he does on this kind of build, where I'm trying to think about it, where aside from being like, I can't even say it's Ice Resist, right? Because Milotic is there, right? What ice type would you rather have? I mean, maybe Kyurem, I guess, but aside from Kyurem, what ice type are you switching in Rotom Heat over Milotic on? I think Kyurem gets Edge as well, so Rotom Heat's not even a reliable check to Kyurem. But overall, I like Lando and Spectre together. I can kind of see those two guys functioning well together and enabling each other. But I don't like how he like synergized the rest of this draft. I don't like there is no Dark type as well. You kind of want you would kind of want a Dark type, I think, because Spectre is your only way of dealing with like Psychic types for Mienshao, right? That I can see. Yeah, Spectre is really the only Pokemon. So, and Spectre is very, you can very easily counter prep bait that with like Weakness Policy, because it's gonna just Shadow Ball you. You can counter prep with Cassie Berry. Like, it's very counter preppable, and the Mienshao is gonna struggle. Where Mienshao is a very good win con, right? It's a very good breaker as well, but your support for Mienshao isn't that good. Whereas you're trying too hard to support Spectre. Where Spectre isn't really a mon where you can kind of just draft around. It's more of the other way around, where you kind of want to have Spectre as a really good supporting piece into a core rather than the main focal point of your draft. And then I'm not sure, because I like Lando on this build, but I feel like it's just Lando, It's just there. It doesn't really it's not really doing anything, It's just kind of there, where it's kind of that kind of mon where it's just there and it just clicks buttons, right? So I guess the idea is that if Landorus weakens enough things, Spectre Shadow Ball can win, but Landorus isn't going to weaken the right things for Spectre as well. Aside from Steel types, I guess. But I mean, if you're staying in with your Steel type on Landorus, you're choking, right? So I'm not sold on Rotom Heat on this kind of build, and Rotom Heat costs 14 points as well. So if you're drafting Rotom Heat, it has to be worth it, I think. And I don't see the value in it. I don't like it as only Rocker's Aggron. I don't like that there's no Dark type. There is a good mix between special and physical breakers. I like that. His hazard removal is pretty ass, I would say. It's literally only Rotom Heat and Landro, which is pretty meh. But yeah, I can kind of see half of the draft, but then the other half of the draft is interestingly weird. Because like even with like a mon like Dragalge, I don't know what exactly it does for him, right? Because you have Rotom Heat for grass types, right? So what does Dragalge offer you that you're paying 9 points for? Aside from not losing the T-Spikes, which I feel like you still will because you're not going to bring Dragalge. So, I mean, it might as well be an Ariados, right? And Audino as well. I don't like Audino. It's kind of just there. It's like, what are you using it for? Like, you're wishing Rotom Heat, is that it? Or you're trying to form a regen core? It's just like, I think he had like a lot of ideas, and then none of them went fully through together is what I gauge of this team overall. So overall, I don't like this draft. I don't know if it's better than Swix, but it kind of has a lot of same issues where I like a lot of these mons, but I don't like them together. So I think they create synergy issues, which is the most important thing. So that is a problem to me. So John's draft, John's draft is pretty fire. I won't lie. This is a draft I would use, to be honest. I mean, the biggest issue for me though is that he drafted Mega Manectric. It's like, why, man? But why? 7 points for Mega Manectric. It's tough, man. And 6 points for Rhydon. Like, you're really making me not like this draft. I think you could have drafted. I think you could have drafted like any other electric type, really. And you would have had a lot of points to get like a good ground, like Swampert. Maybe Pert, right? You could afford Pert, I think. Or like, like Pert or Gastrodon. And you have a good rocker as well, right? So the biggest issue I would see is that your rocker is literally just Rhydon, right? You're just missing a rocker that isn't just Rhydon. Klefki, I think, is really solid as a spiker, as a fairy and a steel, so it's pretty good. I think I like the idea of like Rillaboom Buzzwole with Slowking. They kind of cover each other's weaknesses, and then they're also all really solid offensively. And then obviously with Torn being that nice flying resist for them, and then really covering like electric types, and what's it called, rock types. Like the top mons really synergize well. So I like the draft up to Klefki, I would say. And I don't even mind Lickitung, to be honest. Like, even Lickitung is probably okay. But the Manectric and Rhydon are a little bit suspect. I don't see the problem with Aloe in this draft is I think that Aloe is too passive, where you have really solid like bulky pivots, and like all of these mons are really strong, like really solid together defensively, that you kind of want your water to have momentum. So something like Vaporeon would be a good example, or breaking power. So something like Primarina would be a good example. Whereas Alomomola, it kind of your draft. So with like this region core, you're kind of just like pivoting in, right? And then you're either U-turning, you're teleporting, or you're clicking a move, right? But Alomomola is counterproductive to a lot of what you kind of want to try and do with your breaking, where it puts you at a disadvantage in the game where you're making the game play slower than it needs to be when you're trying to break immediately with the regen power. And then I like the speed tiers. It's pretty solid. I guess that's the one thing that Mega Manectric provides you is decent speed tiers, but yeah, I mean it's really hard to mess up a draft when you have Torn, Slowking, and Hydreigon, right? Like that's just a really solid core. And then Rillaboom makes sense on that kind of build, and Buzzwole even too. So it's really hard to mess up that core. Whereas he has strong prio, he has strong speed tiers. He doesn't have T-Spikes, which I don't think that matters that much on this build. He has a good mix of special and physical breakers. He has good win cons. Hydreigon has a really good win con. Slowking is a really good win con. Even Rillaboom and Buzzwole can be really good win cons. And he has immediate power as well in a lot of those Pokemon. So I kind of like the draft a lot. John is a really solid coach, so he probably will do well, I think. Playoffs, maybe not. It's kind of up to John, but the draft is definitely good enough to get him there, and it's filled with a lot of comfort, I think. So he should do well with this kind of build. Up next is... Let me fix. Up next is Chumi. So, I'm not a big fan of this build. I'm not sure where to start. So I guess the biggest issue for me that I noticed, like as soon as he picked like Crook, I think, is that he lacks like breaking power. I know he tried to fix that with the Crabominable, the Chandelure, the Regidrago, but you know those mons are, quite frankly, you know, dog water, right? I think speed tier wise, it could be a lot better as well. You know, with you know, he'll have Mega Arrow, and Mega Arrow is very good, but Mega Arrow is too fast, right, to force prep. And then your second fastest mon would be the Whimsicott, who also is too fast. Or it's not too fast, but you know, it's like a prankster mon, so the amount of times that I'm actually gonna like speed creep the Whimsicott is very low. Like unless the only time maybe if I have like a fighting type Mega that's faster, which would be like a Scarfer, maybe like a Scarf Manshell would make sense with Poison Jab. That's the only, like, aside from that, your next fastest mon is like Mew, right? I think it's Mew. Yeah, it's Mew. And your team overall is pretty slow. Like just like the core of the team, like Corviknight, Rotom Wash, Crook, those are all very slow guys. And they're not slow, but you know, they're just average speed, which is alright, right? But then you kind of combine that with the Regidrago, the Chandelure, the Crabominable. It's like those guys are like very, very slower. Like Chandelure is, I think, base 60, and it's the fastest out of like those bottom like 6 mons, right? Furfrou is kind of an unmon. I don't think it gets Parting Shot either, so it's kind of doesn't do anything. If it gets Parting Shot, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't get Parting Shot, so it doesn't really do anything aside from maybe stop Spectre from sweeping you. Maybe that's the only thing it really does. But I kind of wish that I mean, it is really hard to draft around Mew well, but I kind of wish that the Mew had an easier time of sweeping rather than just relying on running coverage, right? So even though Crook is a dark type, Crook has a hard time pressuring because it's forced to run defensive, I think, on this kind of build where it's your main rocker, I think. Is it your only rocker? Yeah, it's your main. It's not your only rocker. I mean, Mega Arrow, but it's gonna kind of be your main rocker. It's gonna kind of be like your main electric resist because your grass type is Whimsicott, right? And then Rotom Wash doesn't like taking electric hits necessarily. But I think I kind of see where you're trying to go, but I also don't like how you went about trying to solve a lot of the issues that Mew has. I'm not a big fan of Corviknight, I'll be honest with you. as well. Especially, I feel like you put Celesteela there, and this draft becomes significantly better, right? Because you have another win con. Whereas Corviknight, it's just kind of just sitting there, right? It doesn't really, like, why do you need Corviknight on this kind of build when it doesn't really solve any, there's no issues that Corviknight needs to solve on, like, with your best mons here, right? With Mega Arrow, Mew, Rotom Wash, Corviknight isn't really stopping any of those issues, right? Where it comes from, like are grass types a huge problem? No, not really. You have Mega Arrow. Are fairy types a huge issue? No, not really. Are fighting types, like, you know, ground types, are any of those big issues? No, not really. You have Rotom Wash, right, for ground types, and then Mew is a really good fighting resist. So it feels kind of weird. And then your only rocker, I don't like the only rocker being Crook, like the main rocker, because then you're kind of forced into either running Arrow Rocks or always bringing Crook, which is not that bad, but defensive Crook is pretty mid. And then I just kind of hate everything from Carbonite below. I'll be honest. I don't think they don't really mesh well. So even though, like, there's defensively there's not a lot of weaknesses, offensively they don't really synergize well. You're missing like, I'm not counting these bottom guys, but you're missing like pressure. So Mew can set up and beat any team, right? But you need to put pressure on the opponent and get stuff low, right? And Mega Arrow is very similar in that same way, where a Mega Arrow after DD or after Hone Claws can sweep most teams, and most answers, but they need chip, and they need, like, not a lot of chip, but they need damage, and they need, like, certain conditions to be set to be in the best position to win. And you're basically making it harder for yourself to use Mew, because you're gonna have to think, well, I don't have, like, if they have a Mega Scissor, right? It's a very good example, right? If they have a Mega Scissor, I'm forced to use Chandelure, right? But I can't reliably use Chandelure to get rid of the Mega Scissor, and I have no other way of getting rid of the Mega Scissor, so I'm kind of forced to run, like, Fire Blast on, like, my offensive Mew, or Fire Punch, right? But if I have, like, a really good, like, imagine Infernape. I know Bishop drafted Infernape Mew, and I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but Infernape, you can kind of say, okay, I have Infernape, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on this Scissor. It's not going to be able to, like, check Mew effectively, so I can kind of maybe not run Fire Blast and maybe run Rock Polish, and then now my Mew is really threatening, right? Where I'm going to put a lot of pressure on his Mega Scissor. It's going to have a hard time staying healthy. It's going to not be able to roost effectively and stay out of range, and then my Mew is going to be able to sweep through his team, right? Even though he has a really good check and I don't have fire coverage. Whereas instead you're going to be forced to what's it called? You're going to be forced to run a lot of moves that you probably won't want to run on Mew. And then even then you have no good way of guaranteeing the chip, basically. You're going to be forced to run, like, Specs Wash more times than you probably want, or, like, Offensive Crook, or using any of these slow guys that are not that, you know, great, right? So I feel like that's a big issue. Is the main issue is the speed tiers, and the fact that all of these guys are just bad, right? Even though Chandelure is not that bad, it's bad on this. It's especially bad on this kind of build, where it's one of the fastest mons on it's one of your fastest wall breakers, and it's super slow. And you don't have, like, good momentum to enable it either, right? You only have Wash and Corv. That's pretty much it. And Volt Switch Mew, I guess, but yeah, it's pretty much it. You have Grounded Poison though, so, and a Dark type, so you're not gonna get cheesed, but I do see the issues winning games rather than preventing like, you're not gonna lose games, but you're gonna have a hard time winning games, basically. So next is Azuri. So this, I think this is a pretty good team. I like, so Dansey Celestial Zygarde. I think I've seen that core is more of an SM core, because Zygarde is not that good in Sword and Shield, but I kind of like the build overall. I would say it kind of struggles with. I feel like Pert could have been something else, a more offensive mon. Because I feel like if you're gonna go Tentacruel, right? If you're gonna go double water, you kind of want like a Suicune or something, right? Or maybe Prim. Oh no, you don't. We don't want Prim. You have Diancie, but like a Suicune, I think would be really cool in this build. Or I mean, Manaphy doesn't really work anymore, but I think like a Suicune would be really cool. Because you kind of have a Zygarde. But overall, I think the only major issue is the speed tier issue. Even though it's not that bad, right? It's just average, or it could be much better. It's kind of lacking momentum as well, where the only real momentum you have is Mess Spirit, I think. Mess Spirit, Volcarona. I guess Decidueye. So I kind of like the synergy between the main guys though is really good, and that's the most important thing, right? And then like I like the fact that you understood like Celesteal and Zygarde, right? Those guys, it's a ground and steel that doesn't get rocks, so I need to draft Mess Spirit, and that's important to know when you're drafting either Celesteal or Zygarde. But I do wish that you had another rocker, even though Mess Spirit is a very good rocker. It's kind of frail. I mean, Yuxi would be probably more solid, but I think Kang also gets rocks, but I mean, it's Kang's gun, right? You have T-Spikes, which are pretty solid, especially with Zygarde. T-Spikes with Zygarde is really good. I wish you had better momentum, though. I think momentum would be really good in this build, whereas they're kind of just a lot of like really solid mons that are fat, where if you're able to get them in freer, then it would, like something like this kind of build where Rotom Heat makes a lot of sense instead of Volcarona. But I don't mind it overall, because I think you have a lot of ways to win games. Every single mon up till Volcarona, even Swampert, and then Mess Spirit as well, and even Decidueye can kind of win games for you and catch opponents off guard. So you have a lot of win cons. You have pretty good breaking power with Diancie mainly, and then Zygarde as well, and both specially and physically. The hazard removal is solid enough. It's nothing crazy, but I mean, Magic Bounce plus like Spin, and Defog Decidueye. I wish Decidueye wasn't. I'm not a big fan of the Mon Decidueye. Like, I think the problem with most grasses that are above like 7 points or like 8 points, even, probably like more like 7, however much a Vileplume costs. Grass types that cost more than Vileplume are kind of just not worth it when you could get a cheap grass that kind of fills what you need, right? You just need something to take EQs, maybe get Leech Off, maybe Sleep Powder, just some like small niche that a grass type can fulfill. And then the Decidueye doesn't really do anything crazy, right? So that's the only issue. Is I don't like Decidueye. I'm not a big fan of Kang. But overall, I like the draft. I see the synergy. If I had to rank it based on what I've seen so far, but I mean, it's just a very like standard draft. Like, I've seen this core do a lot of work with Diancie, Celesteal, and Zygarde, and it's like a tested core where it's been proven to be good. If I had to rank it, I probably around where John's draft is, where it has a couple of holes, but overall it's very hard to mess up with a draft when you have Diancie, Celesteal, Zygarde, right? If you have Tornti, Slowking, and Hydreigon, right, it's very hard to mess up, right? The rest, even though the rest of the picks are maybe not the best, like, it's still very solid. So I like it overall. It's probably around John's level. Still worse than Logan and Brian's, I think. I think Logan and Brian's are the best so far, but top 5 drafts so far, and it's pretty good. So Smitty's draft, I like Smitty's draft a lot. I kind of wish that, it's kind of like every pick I was super on board with up to Scarm. Even Umbreon, I'm not that opposed to Umbreon. With Umbreon is kind of a nice like it's just like a blanket mon where it kind of just covers losing to like a lot of like random things, even though it is liable to prep bait, or it's liable to like getting counter prepped really easily. It's a little bit one dimensional. But Gorgeist, Gorgeist is pretty good, I'd say. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but I understand it with Umbreon as like a defensive core together. I kind of see what he's trying to do. Even like Garbodor, I kind of understand the point of Garbodor is you want to ground a poison, right? And it gives you T-spikes, spikes. It's after the, I think it gets poison point. I'm not sure, but it definitely gets aftermath. You can do aftermath, Rocky Helmet. It gets stuff into the range of Coco and Fernape. It's like if they have like I'd say Urshifu is a good example, Urshifu, and you just need like a little bit of chip to guarantee that Urshifu always dies to like your Infernape or your Coco, then Garbodor can guarantee you that. It can get you up like 1 T-spike and you're set to try and win the game, right? I don't like the Cryogonal Ursaring. Ursaring mainly because I don't see exactly what it does. I feel like you just kind of want just another mon to just give you momentum, or you want something that can abuse Tapu Koko and Burden. I'm not sure who exactly that would be, but just anything that kind of synergizes better, because it's just kind of just a mon. I know it does a lot of damage. I know Sip has used it in the past. I think it's just kind of average. But overall, I like it a lot, actually. I kind of see the synergy between everybody. Defensively, it's probably even better than it needs to be defensively, and then offensively, it's also very solid. I think the only issue I see personally is that because you drafted so many defensive checks, you have really good breakers, right? But you don't have really good wind guns, so you're gonna rely a lot on just out prep, or not out prepping, but out playing your opponents. Whereas, say if I have like a Mew, right? Obviously Mew would make a lot of sense in this build, but you're never gonna get Mew in this build. But like if you had a Mew, you'd have another level of threat, right? Where it can kind of prep, it can kind of like set up, and you have a really good setup threat, right? But I don't see the setup threat necessarily, but I see good breakers, right? So I mean, obviously Coco and Garchomp can set up, but they're not the greatest win cons necessarily, because this Garchomp is slow. So that's the only issue I see mainly. But defensively it's very solid, and then it has a lot of momentum offensively, and I could see it doing well. I like it a lot. I'd say it's probably better than like Azeri and John's, but I wouldn't use it over Azeri and John's probably. So it's probably around the level of Azeri and John's draft overall, but I still like Logan Brenn's draft the most. So Sip's draft, it's I think I remember looking at this earlier and thinking just like some standard stuff basically. It's like Lando, Mega Scissor. I think he has Zapdos now. It's like pretty standard stuff basically. I think the main thing I don't like is Quagsire being your only water type. I understand Lax is there as an ice resist, and I like that. Like you kind of identified, probably want another ice resist that isn't like like Mega Sizz, or I guess Weavile. I don't know. The Weavile doesn't resist ice, so I think only water types do. But yeah, I think Dunsparce is not a mon. It doesn't really do anything. But I understand that you just needed a 1-pointer. And then I like Plume. I don't like Aromatisse at all, really. It's kind of too expensive, right? And then it doesn't really it's way too passive, I think. Because I feel like it doesn't offer you like pressure. And then like let's say they go into their steel type, right? Your Aromatisse is going to be low then, right? Because you just get forced out immediately. Or if they go into their poison type, like it has no way of like actually like stopping people from like putting pressure on you. Whereas a lot of fairies like Sylveon, it gets coverage, right? And it's much bulkier. Or Comfey can get like U-turn. It has immediate like synthesis, right? And then Sylveon is way stronger offensively than Aromatisse too. So I think that's an issue. Even though Aromatisse is immune to like Taunt and like Encore and all that stuff, it doesn't really matter where they're just gonna go hard into their threat, right? But speed tier wise, I like it. You have a grounded poison, which is nice. You have a really solid dark type. So this Weavile is gonna pressure, whereas this Weavile is a very good example of like a mon that's just good at pressure, and then he also has good win cons, right? Because Scissor is a really good win con, Lando is a really good win con, even Weavile is a really good win con. And then he has the Zapdos is gonna be here. Zapdos is a really good breaker as well. So he has a good strong physical, special breakers. He has good win cons. Lax is also one of the best win cons in the game. So I like Sip's draft a lot. Only thing I don't like is Quagsire being your only water type. That's pretty much it. Also your only ground type technically. But I mean, even then, it's not the worst thing in the world. So I probably rank it like third after Logan and Brian's. But it's probably better than Brian's draft. I'd say it's probably the second best draft after Logan's. Just because I forgot Brian has like he has a Chinchino, you know. Pie's draft is very solid. Speed tier wise, it's pretty solid. It's probably, even though like Greninja being your only like fast mon, it's probably like top 3 or top 5 at least, like speed tier wise, I think. Garchomp, Mega Mamo, Victini, Slowbro, Gren, like Comfy, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mons together are probably gonna win you like 75% of your games. Even plus Poly is fine. Then you have Grounded Poison to cover that possibility of losing the T-Spikes. You have your own T-Spikes as well, which is pretty nice. And then even your role player's throw is not that bad. Ambipom could be better, but it gives you a nice speed tier. I think it's 115. So you kind of cover that. You're kind of covering from Victini to the 115 tier. I think, because I think even though Gran is 123, and Victini is 100, I think Pokemon in between will just run Modest, right? If they're 115, so it's a really good. It covers most of the speed tiers necessary. Lilligant, I think there's probably better grass types than Lilligant. I don't know if it gets strength trap. I think it does. If it's better than Blossom, I think this draft is probably the best draft overall. And Pi is probably the best player in this pool. It's just a matter of whether or not Pi is going to try. If Pi tries, he probably can win this pool really easily. Win this split really easily and guarantee playoffs, right? So I think the only other coach that's probably as good as Pi is maybe Brian and maybe Sip. Because especially considering that Pi is probably the best draft, so it's gonna be pretty hard to beat this draft, I think. Where he just has like he has you know, really good rockers, he has really good momentum, he has really good braking, he has really good win cons. Like he kind of just has everything, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much it. The only thing is Comfy is your only defogger. It's probably the only issue I see. The only main issue I see. But I mean, I don't think that's a huge issue, especially on this kind of build where you're just gonna be clicking buttons basically, right, and getting a lot of momentum. So I like Pi's draft a lot. Yeah. So Luna's draft. So I mean, it's an interesting draft. For one, you know, Gengar round 1 is a little bit weird, right? And then you take Como round 2, and it's like, okay, I mean, it's pretty weird. Then you take Thundurus round 3, right? And it's like, I mean, Zapdos was there, right? You know, and why am I going Thundurus, right, when I have Gengar for the speed tier already, right? And then you kind of just take like a bunch of random mods, like in the middle. It's like Absol for Alligator. Talonflame is a good Pokemon at least, but it's like I don't get like Permarina plus Feraligatr at all, right? Really, like what's so like if you think about like a let's say we're in a game, right? Like when am I ever gonna want to rather go into Feraligatr than Permarina, right? It's pretty much never. You're never like if your Permarina specs or Scarf, when is Feraligatr a better switch in? Never really. So I don't understand what Feraligatr does like at all. It's not even that Feraligatr is a good Pokemon either, right? You went out of your way to draft like Feraligatr, right? If this was like, I don't know, like Heatran or something, you know, at least Heatran is a good Pokemon, but you went out of your way to draft Feraligatr. It's like, but why? Like it's ass. Eldritch Glass is not that bad, but without any of the regen mons, it's kind of weird. Your rockers are pretty solid, I would say, but Como doesn't really like to run rocks, but I mean, maybe you're gonna be forced into running defensive Como a lot, I guess, because your only other your ground resist is Eldritch Glass, I think, right? Yeah, it's just Eldritch Glass. Your speed tiers are, while they're good, they're all bad mons that are good. Like your Thundurus, your Absol are pretty meh mons, I think. Overall, I think overall it's like these 9-point mons are pretty suspect. When Talonflame is the best one out of all of them, and then the synergy between these guys, I can see the synergy, right, between Gengar Como, but Gengar Como feels like it should be somewhere like in the middle, right? Like you should have something like a Garchomp. I mean, not Garchomp specifically, but something that gives you like that people are gonna look at your team and they're like, okay, I gotta prep for the Garchomp. Okay, I gotta prep for the Lando T. I gotta prep for the Lando I. And if you look at everyone else's drafts, who they picked round 1 is a Pokemon that you have to immediately respect and prep for. Whereas Gengar, I mean, Gengar is just Gengar, you know, it's really one-dimensional as a Pokemon. And even though there are other ways that you can prep with Gengar, it's really one-dimensional. So it's kind of more of a support mon than it's kind of just like a wall breaker, right? But it's not really it's not Urshifu, right? Urshifu is just a wall breaker, but it's not, you know, Gengar's not on the level. And I don't know, it just feels very meh. Whereas it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's also not anything crazy, right? It's just a meh draft to me. Luna's one of the better coaches in this split, I would say, from what I've seen. Granted, he did lose to this guy, even with T-Spikes. I think you're the only coach ever to lose to him with using T-Spikes, to be honest with you. So maybe he doesn't make playoffs, but I feel like if Pie and Brian doesn't try, you probably make him make playoffs. So there's that aspect. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the Feraligatr, to be honest. So I feel like your Scald resist is just Prim, right? And Prim doesn't like taking Scald. Even though it doesn't mind it, right? Like you don't mind switching in Prim on a Scald. You probably don't want to unless you're Sleep Talk. So that could be an issue. But I think speed tiers are okay. You have decent rockers. You have ground and poison, so you kind of have everything you need. You have good breakers and good win cons, so you kind of have what you need for a draft. But it just feels underwhelming considering this is like a 12-man pool. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it's a 12-man pool. It's not 16-man pool where you're forced to take Gengar round 1 and Como round 2, or not even like. This feels like if I was in a 24-man pool and I was picking like 22, this is something that I would take round 1, maybe Gengar, right? But I feel like even Como is not a mon that I would ever take round 2, especially the early round 2 pick. Like I feel like there's just better mons. Like I mean Hydreigon, for example. Hydreigon was available, right? Why is Gengar Hydreigon not better than Como like all the time, basically, right? So it feels weird. And then like you're using, so by getting like this kind of cheap offensive threats, right? You kind of went cheap on your first couple picks, and then the way you solve that is by getting like a bunch of like average overpriced mons in the middle, right? So that's the part I don't like. So if the draft was more solid as a whole, then you could maybe argue that the Gengar was good, but then like these picks in the middle were kind of weird. Sappy, it's a sappy draft, you know. 1 point left over, because I mean, why not, right? You don't need all the points. It's I mean, it's hard to know where he's going, right? Obviously, I mean, I'm just gonna like, be as critical as I can be, but he does have a dark type, so he does have good breakers, I would say. I mean, he has good win cons as well, so as far as everything you need, like, he has everything you need, I would say, because he does have good rockers. Toad is one of the best rockers. And Golem at least learns rocks, I guess. Bisharp also gets rocks, I'm pretty sure. He has T-Spikes with Beedrill, which is pretty cool. Just the only issue I would say is maybe the speed tiers are a little bit suspect, but it's not that bad, honestly. Like, between Beedrill, Raikou. It's just the main issue is that after Raikou, there's the next fastest mon, I think, is Togekiss, which is, I think that's where the main issue is. But overall, it's a little bit weird draft. I feel like I don't know if like his ideal was that I'm gonna stop default with Defiant Bisharp, right, and then I'm gonna just draft a bunch of like hazard setters, right, with Chestnut and Beedrill. But I feel like that's something that's obviously been something for a long time now, right? But I feel like you just draft Zapdos Galar, and then this draft is way better, right? Because then you actually have a real Defiant, like Abuser. It's way faster. It has a good speed tier, and then it doesn't even matter that you have double fighting, I think. So the Togekiss, I think, is the only Pokemon in this draft where I feel like it's a little bit out of place. But I mean, I like all of the Mons overall, except maybe like Golem and maybe Gudra too. I think Gudra's a little bit overpriced. But the questions about like I'm not sold on the synergy, but I could see this draft doing, getting wins. I could see him going like 5 and 6 and upsetting a lot of coaches. I don't know if it's good enough to make playoffs, but I could definitely see this draft getting a lot of wins, I'll be honest. So it's not even that bad. And I know Sappy isn't trying to create, the most powerful draft ever, so overall I'm not that mad at it, even though objectively it is the worst draft, but by Sappy standards it's not that bad. Cuz I kind of like a lot of the Mons overall. But it's pretty much it. So if I had to rank the drafts and predict like 4 coaches from this split that would make playoffs, I'd probably say Pi. I'll rank the drafts first. I like Pi's draft. I like Logan's draft. Those are the main 2 I like. After that, it's kind of like a lot of the other drafts are kind of just like in the same like atmosphere where they're like, there's like a lot of drafts, like I'd say like Brian's, John's, well, I don't know, Brian, John's, and Azari's drafts are probably the next, and Smitty's drafts are probably the next tier, where they're all pretty solid drafts that I could see you doing well with. And then there's a bunch of drafts where they're not that bad, but they're not that good as well. Where that's Chumi's, that's Shurs, that's probably I like Sip's draft is good too. I put Sip's draft number 3 as well. Or it was like, what was my tangent? Luna's draft, where it's like, it's not that bad, but it's not that good either, right? So there's a lot of like, there's like kind of 3 tiers where there's good drafts, there's like great drafts, there's good drafts, and then there's like average drafts, right? I wouldn't say anyone's draft is bad, like bad, or it's like unviable, or it's like, I remember the last time I did a PR vid, I still remember ATT's, he had like triple steal. He had like Kartana, Celesteela, like Magnezone, like it was like awful, and I think he won like 2 and 15 or something like that. So it's like nothing is as bad as that. Even though there's some suspect stuff, nothing's that that like unviable bad. But if I had to predict 4 coaches, I know the playoffs it's not going to be exactly 4 from each split, or it could be, but it doesn't have to be. If I had to pick the best 4, I think that would make it out of this. Probably be Pi, Brian, S-Tier, and then it's hard picking the 4th, I'd be honest. I'd probably say Luna. No. it's gonna be Pi. It's gonna be Pi, Brian, S Tier, and Sip. I think. Would be the main four. And then I could see like Luna or John making it over Pi or Brian if neither of them are trying, which is a possibility, of course. But yeah, that's my overall thoughts. I think I covered pretty much everything I needed to, but all the drafts that I like, all the drafts I dislike. So yeah, I'm probably just gonna call it here. It's been PRs. I'll probably do the other one maybe when it finishes. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and see you guys in the next one, man.